It's the Two
Strange
Podcast.
Okay, we are into another episode of Two Strange Men. My name's Carl,
I'm Tom.
and this is just a quick plea. No, not a plea. We're not like that. But yeah,
we're begging now.
I just leaning on the idea that podcasts are all sort of like run by celebrities. If you are a celebrity, okay, we are willing to work with you. Okay, we're happy to
For your exposure.
Yeah, for your exposure. Yeah, Three Strange Men. I figured I worked it all out. Like, obviously it's an even sort of like preparation and stuff like that. But because obviously you've got more money than us, then we'll split any profits.
I'd be happy to do the groundwork.
Yeah. And also, like, you don't have to worry about like room and board. Like, you come visit us at our studios and stuff like that. You can stay in my shed. You can sleep in my shed.
It's not
on my
sled.
sled.
That's with a little bit of a blanket.
Yeah. And yeah, Tom's going to cook you some food. You can have that in a lunchbox.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm fine with that. I have got like a top 5, but I don't know if we're picky.
A top 5 celebrities or
absolutely,
lunches?
Yeah. Well, both.
Yeah.
Because you've got to itemise your life through your top 5s, right?
Yeah, okay.
So
I don't.
Top 5
I
sleds, top 5 sheds, top 5 lunches.
All right, okay. Give me your top 2 celebrities that you would want on this podcast.
Well, we've discussed one.
Oh, Nicolas Cage.
Absolutely, forever and a day.
Yeah, okay.
And then just because I'm all about equality, right? So we've got to, if we're going to have a male celebrity, we've got to have a female celebrity.
But the name of the podcast, you can't do that.
Yeah, but like
Two strange men and a woman and a baby.
Yeah, look, I'll shell out. I'll be a corporate shill. Like just give me the check.
All
My
right,
eyes are pound signs right
All
now.
right, come on. Who is the female presenter we would have?
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, she makes films too. She's a director.
Okay. All right. I don't know how I feel about that. It wouldn't be my pick. Definitely not.
What's your pick?
What as a like
If
a
we had
female?
to have a female co-host.
Like a female comedian rather than a Scarlett. I don't know if like Scarlett's got a lot to generally like bring to the dynamic here.
Have you heard her speak like about film though?
No.
She's pretty cool.
Okay.
She's certainly been better mic host than me.
Oh, okay.
Down
Well,
the
I'll just
circles,
replace
aren't
you. It's like one strange man interviews Scarlett Johansson every week.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I'd still tune in. I'd be
Okay.
bitter about it, but I'd tune in.
Okay, so this is an open plea to Scarlett Johansson. If you want to help co-host this podcast, Tom is willing to step back. He's still going to provide you with lunches, and you can still sleep in my shed.
I'm not stepping down for Nicolas Cage though.
Okay, right. Yeah, you're gonna be
that's
one
right.
in the room. How about this? Okay, we both step down, and then Two Strange Men becomes a podcast with Scarlett Johansson and Nicolas Cage.
And we'd make so much money.
We'd make so much money, wouldn't we? And we rake in all the profits,
Yeah.
and they'll just do it for the kindness of their hearts.
And we'll be like, it's a charity thing. Because that's what YouTubers do, don't they? They pretend that they're charities and then they keep all the money.
Yeah.
So,
By the way, with that in mind, I just wanted to use this podcast to let people know that we have our own coin now. Strange Men coin, okay? You wanna get on that, okay? Whatever it is that you do with the stocks and
T's and C's apply.
yeah, T's and C's apply. We are not going to like pull the rug from out under you. That's not our style.
And the digital coin has a little Strange Man logo on it.
Yeah. Well, that's an NFT. You have to buy that separately.
Oh, okay. I thought they were packaged together.
Yeah. Anyway, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about metamodernism.
Well, yes, meta. I wanted to just generally talk about meta, but also talk about metamodernism. Now, we're doing this through the lens of The Substance, which we watched yesterday.
Fantastic film.
It's a fantastic film, isn't it? And there was a lot more for us to talk about. We talked about how it was a sort of like a pastiche of all sorts of different things. It was comprised of references to other such films, etc. And I put a metamodern like stamp on it. But I think we need to understand what metamodernism is. And yeah, this is the forum in which we're going to do it. We're going to do an absolutely poor job of doing this as well.
Speak for yourself. buckle in. This is a 3 to 4 hour journey on how modernism became postmodernism and how postmodernism became metamodernism.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm glad that you're coming in with this confidence.
So did I say 3 to 4 hours? I meant 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, I was under the impression that you hadn't really come across metamodernism before I threw that out there. Is that true? Would you say?
I think I had an awareness of like the modernism movement.
Yeah.
Through more postmodernism, again bringing my background into it, I kind of did some postmodernism type work.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of postmodernism and, you know, the idea between modernism and postmodernism. Modernism is relatively new to me, but super interesting because it takes those kind of opposing elements of modernism and postmodernism and whacks them together in this sort of like experimental package.
But I want this to be a accessible introduction to these sort of topics.
Yeah.
So we're not going to go like too much into detail in some areas because like the more you look into it, the more doors it opens, and this is really just an introduction for people to like learn more, I guess. And one thing I wanted to say, you're saying that, like, you know, I've made some postmodern work and stuff like that, etc. But like, you know, we're kind of in that phase and have been in that phase since like the 60s or whatever, you know. Like surely everything is postmodern at this point in time, no?
I mean, you can argue that. And to try and kind of conceptually understand this as kind of like where metamodernism is gone, I do what I always do. I went to Reddit.
Oh, you went to Reddit?
I saw this post, which is amazing, and it's explain metamodernism to me as if I was 5.
Yeah.
And by golly gosh, did I find a gold mine.
Oh, really?
And it was not simple.
No, it wasn't. And
But,
people would argue, like, when you go down that road, like, there's so many posts of, like, is this thing metamodern?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, yeah, or oh, no. And it's just like, nah, you're talking shite. Like, you're talking shit. You're talking out of your arse a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? But, like, I mean, I'm pulling you to one side while I say this, but isn't that a lot of, like, philosophy and like, theoretical principles and stuff like that?
Absolutely. And our changing attitudes changes how we view the philosophy and the theory in question, right?
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is, like, if you even, at a basic level, Google metamodernism examples, people argue about which example fits.
Yeah, totally.
The best, like, metamodernism thing for me that I've ever seen, outside of, like, Childish Gambino, which I'm sure...
he came up.
Which I'm sure we'll talk about, is Inside by Bo Burnham.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's not something I've watched. I probably should have watched this for this, because this is something, obviously, that you've talked about. Yep. But, like, you know, if anything, like, we've got lots of examples. So, like, Childish Gambino, you know, has been mentioned in, like, particular websites where these metamodern, like, principles are kind of defined. So there's a website called Notes on Metamodernism. Yeah, that one has finished up now. I think it finished in like 2019 or 2016, something like that. So it ran for about 10 years. And a couple of Scandinavian professors would like work on that, and it was related to an initial essay, but then it turned into more and more essays and stuff like that, and was kind of like a landmark, at least on the internet, for people to kind of access the idea of metamodernism, you know. But it's not the first time it was ever mentioned, obviously, but that's the first point someone's kind of stuck a flag down on the internet and say, this is a new movement.
For our listeners, should we try and define metamodernism or try and put some characteristics so they can kind of see where we're coming from?
I want to do this in stages. I want to say what is meta, what is modernism, postmodernism, and then metamodernism. Yeah, but we can hang around first and talk about the idea of what meta is. I think that's important. Okay, so one thing you've got to take into account is that meta is now this kind of prefix that you can put on anything. Yeah. So, for example, you know, a big one would be like metaphysics, or metaphilosophy, metamathematics, a lot of people will know metadata. Yeah. And essentially it just means, it's a term that essentially relates to around something or about something. Yeah. So metadata is data about data.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, you've got all sorts of different meta theory, and essentially any subject can have a meta theory. Yeah. So, you could go really meta with breakfast time. I don't know how that exactly would look.
I was going to say, please divulge. Give us a visual image for a potential YouTube short. Give us a very visual image that I could pull from that about how you'd be meta at breakfast time.
Okay, well, I mean, like in our conversations outside of this podcast, we get very meta about breakfast.
We talk outside this podcast. We don't exist past this podcast. We are AI voices, people.
No, that's not true. That's not true. So, like, we talk about porridge, don't we? And we get into porridge because we've got a colleague who has he's a carnivore and has a meat-based diet, and they're basically like, no, you shouldn't be eating porridge because of this, this, and this. And we go into we go into the science of it, etc. And we're referencing like the science of like bioavailability and nutrition and other such things, and that is about breakfast time. Isn't it? And that's around the subject of breakfast time. And we're not just going, did you enjoy your porridge? Yes, sir, I did enjoy my porridge. Yeah. Or actually eating the porridge. You're thinking about the porridge. You're having discourse about the porridge.
I mean, our jobs, we need to be meta about a lot of things. Film, the analysation of almost... I mean, this podcast is meta, right?
Yeah. Like especially
now. The whole structure, yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to be meta on meta, yeah?
Super meta.
Meta squared. Yeah.
Meta squared.
So there's an origin to it all, okay? Plato used the term to describe the human condition of being in between the human and divine realms, okay?
Okay.
Metaxis is the concept that describes a state of being in between or in a middle ground. Yeah, in between a subject. Yeah, it can refer to the transition between worlds or the ability to perceive multiple perspectives at once. Yeah, so that's its origins. Yeah, and then we've got all extra stuff that's gone into this, where we have all of this like referencing itself and being about itself, etc. Yeah, and so we really get into it, don't we? And we are at a level now of understanding, even like a basic level of education, people kind of are aware of the term meta and when something is meta, when something is being meta, And a good example, just to start off with, is like, say, for example, Barbie. Yeah? In the film Barbie, there are points in time where the writer is directly breaking a fourth wall and talking about the film in which they are creating while they're creating it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now that is self-referential. Yeah? That is making a reference in film for entertainment purposes on the subject of filmmaking. Yeah? A nice simple way to do it, and with a simple premise. Barbie is very popular, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone saw that. And so that should be an easy way for people to go in, But say, for example, something that's perhaps a bit more out there is the idea of, breaking the fourth wall within Malcolm in the Middle, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah? They talk to the camera, or at least one character talks to the camera, much like in previous things like Boy Meets World or other such things like that, where you had, the narration and stuff like that. That's not meta. That's just talking about the narrative, and it's just staying within that narrative.
Yeah.
But we are looking outside of the narrative and looking in when we have, I can't remember the writer's name, it's the it doesn't matter, but the writer of Barbie is then going like, if we were going to say that this person was ugly, we shouldn't have cast Margot Robbie to play that character.
Yeah.
Slaps knee, look what we've done, sort of thing.
So where do you sit if we're talking about stuff being self-referential and breaking the fourth wall? Where do you sit with The Office?
So The Office is a mockumentary.
Yeah. Where do you sit with mockumentaries as a genre?
as a genre, I love a good old mockumentary. I think like English comedy has sort of like helped to. I mean, it's not had an origin, I guess, in English comedy, but like The Office really put it in the map. We had films like, for example, The Great American Movie and other such things that kind of, used that. And yeah, I think it's a real strong form of comedy.
Yeah.
It's like when we're thinking of the idea of whether it's like reaching a level of like meta thought. It can obviously at some point in time, and I don't want to be sitting here and going what's meta and what's not, because that's the thing that I find annoying when we're looking at it.
I've trapped you.
Yeah, but it's like anything has elements of meta in it, you know. And it's all about the way in which you look at it, and things can be quite subtle, and like. When we later go on and look at the idea of metamodernism, this idea of just generally meta within media and the idea of referencing the self, referencing the idea of writing a book or filmmaking and stuff like that within it, or referencing the audience looking at us, etc. That's not like at the full heart of the idea of metamodernism, as a movement. It's on broader terms. I'm just trying to get people to understand the idea of what like meta can be. And it's not something that can be mistaken for like intertextuality, which I think it often gets like mixed up with. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Yeah. So like when we're referencing a piece of media within a film or something like that, or a book, etc., those two texts, whether they're film or whether they're book or whatever they are, those two texts, and we read them as text, they are being intertwined together. You make references, you make homages, you make quotes from other things to other things, so say for example a highly intertextual film would be, say, High Fidelity, where they're continuously referencing in their different music artists and stuff like that. He lives in a music store. Be Kind, Rewind is a film that has loads of references to other such things as well. And so that is intertextual in nature. And you could argue that any of these things are postmodern, metamodern, or whatever. It doesn't fucking matter, at the end of the day. But it's like we're just, at this stage, just talking about the techniques that make them up, So, if the piece that you're watching, if the text is introspective in any way, shape or form, from an audience perspective or from an author's perspective, then it is meta in some way, And within that, you have all of the intertextual references, potentially, that add to that. We as an audience, we as an author are aware of these other texts, and so we make reference to them as we refer to our own creations. Yeah, that's fair. I'm just giving you a moment to go in because I've been talking for a bloody long time.
I let it soak. Imagine my brain as a sponge, and all of that information was a pool. I'm slurping it all up.
That's good. Be careful though, because I have pissed in the pool. I will always piss in the pool.
I always tell you not to piss in the pool. This is a common conversation.
I've shat in the pool as well, Tom. It's gone straight up.
Why is
it
always poo?
Why always poo?
Why always poo?
Because that is my...
It's your common denominator. That's your...
We're getting into meta territory. Is us talking about the idea of me mentioning poo in all of my conversations.
Is it self-referential? Is it meta?
I think pretty much everything I do has an element of irony to it. And I love to reference myself. I'm a massive self-referencer.
I can validate that.
Thank you. I need that.
As somebody who is around you probably as much as you are around your family.
It's true. Oh God.
I can validate that experience. It's funny, isn't it, that we were talking earlier about this idea that everybody gets a little bit uppity about how we kind of define things like modernism, meta theories, because really philosophy is just the theory of how things work.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, well, this is what it is, and this is what I don't like to discuss about this.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, everyone has their own sort of like feelings and thoughts on this, don't they? I mean, you clearly have a way, a certain viewpoint.
I guess,
yeah. like a hammer to the face, that.
Yeah.
And then it all just starts to merge into the conversation, like about what meta is, what it is. But really, for me, when you look at all of these things, I just come back to the human experience, because that's what all of this is.
Yeah.
All of this philosophy, this entire podcast, everything that we talk about is about connecting to the human experience. And I think when you look at modernism and postmodernism and metamodernism, and everything that came before with the Greek philosophers and every philosopher we've had before, it's all about trying to connect to the human experience and make sense of this absolute vastness that we call life.
Yeah, I mean that would relate to what the idea of metaxis was, or at least Plato's use of metaxis in philosophy was the idea of you've got the human condition, and then you've got this movement in between, or the human and God realms. Essentially, we're looking at these concepts from the position of outside of a human perspective. We're trying to see these things. What does the gods think about the human condition? Like, let's get to that level is essentially, I guess, that. And within that, an interesting offshoot of all of this is the idea of metaphysics, or the study of reality and existence. And this is something that was formally explored by Aristotle, and coined the idea of metaphysics. And it was actually one of Aristotle's writers who coined that term, metaphysics. I've got some interesting questions to ask you.
Oh,
metaphysical questions.
We all know how good I am at questions on the fly. Let's get into this, baby.
Okay, so you are Tom McGarity, and this is Mastermind. You have chosen as your subject metaphysics.
I certainly didn't, but let's go for that.
Well, this is what I've got here, sir. So this is what we're doing, okay? All of your family are watching.
Prize?
Okay. Sorry?
Do I win a prize?
You win your freedom. Anyway, let's get started. So, is there anything that must be true of absolutely everything that exists? You can say pass.
Is there anything that must be true?
Is there anything that must be true of absolutely everything that exists?
Yes, there has to be a constant. There's always something that is constantly there, right? So there's if we check it as a true or false, if we look at it from a games design perspective, check true or false. Something always has to be a constant. Something always has to be checked for true for it to be in existence.
Question 2. Must anything that exists have intrinsic properties?
No.
Question 3. What are properties? Are they universals or tropes, or?
I see them as atoms.
You're doing a lot better than I would with these.
I'm getting a little bit scared.
It's funny. So basically, what I'm reading from is it was taken from a philosophy university course. Their website.
Okay.
They basically had some metaphysical questions that are among the bewildering variety of questions that raise metaphysical issues. Yeah?
Okay.
And what I find funny is, as you go down these, it literally goes like number 9 is, what are numbers? I was half expecting if they were to continue
the numbers
down.
will cease to exist.
Yeah, what is time? Is time real or an illusion? Could time be cyclic? These are some of the later ones.
Yeah.
And I just I carried it on. I was like, what is? And the next one, what?
Then just a W. Then a made up symbol.
The third is just a question mark.
Raised eyebrow.
Yeah. Is space real or is it an illusion, Tom?
I believe it's real.
Okay.
If we're defining it as an illusion to what?
An illusion. I mean, have you ever been there?
So are we the rabbit in the hat?
What is space? Are we talking about cosmic, like
God,
celestial
I hate
space?
this episode so much.
Are we talking about celestial space? Are we talking about like what is the blackness?
I have to
of
teach
space?
after this, Carl. I can hear it. Could you hear, if you're silent for a second.
No, we're on a podcast.
Can you hear? Just 1 second. That's my brain cooking.
That's your brain.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is silence?
Yeah. I mean, like, so it actually brought up another point there. Like, we're not just talking about, you know, film and like modern culture, etc. in a most basic form. There's all sorts of other ways that you could go around this. So like, I kind of felt like what was an interesting like thing to consider is that joke thing that went around, which was birds aren't real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So birds, if for anyone doesn't know, it's essentially this internet sort of like meme that's going around that gets quite a lot of traction. Is the idea that people are parodying the idea of conspiracy theories by creating a conspiracy theory that is like hilariously sort of like untrue. You know, I mean, I have tested it out. I capture songbirds periodically and tear into their chest to see if I can find circuit boards. And not once, Tom, have I come across any circuit boards, okay, in there, unless one has swallowed one, and then it would be just in its intestinal tract.
In an unrelated note, I will be co-hosting with another person next week.
You're hoping Nicolas Cage or Scarlett Johansson will come in?
Well, I don't think they're ripping open birds to check their circuits.
Well, funnily enough, I have periodically ripped open any of the other celebrities that have offered to, you know, co-host with you, just to check to see if they have circuit boards.
I wondered why they weren't getting back to me. It's very unlike them.
I mean, it's a simple experiment to do, and they could just recover and then come back to us, but we've just not had no luck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, I think as we move on to the idea of like metamodernism, I think having in the back of your mind that meme of birds aren't real is kind of like an interesting like thing to have, because you know it's away from film, it's away from books, and it's away from other things like that. It is in its way a performance art that's provided like en masse. Like a lot of people are involved in that and just running the joke and keeping the joke going. So I'm going to mention that again, but like, you know, it's ironic. It's referring, as a joke, it's referring to the idea that conspiracy theories can be a bit silly.
Yeah.
And that's at the heart of it, isn't it? That's the joke. Yeah? So anyway, let's move on. Okay, I think we've kind of covered the idea of meta to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Yeah? So what is this idea of modernism, postmodernism, and then metamodernism? Yeah? How would you define modernism first?
So modernism, like most kind of movements or like philosophical movements, was a reaction to what was happening in the world.
Yeah.
So to understand modernism, we kind of have to go back to post-World War One.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about post-World War One Britain, post-World War in general.
Globally, yeah.
And the rise of industrialization was coming back. With the World War came advancements, and our technology was on the rise.
Yeah, it was looking good.
And we were getting out of war. We were trying to find hope again.
Yeah.
So modernism was this reaction of that civilization was changing. We were moving towards a more positive and optimistic outcome. And we just had such a horrendous historical kind of event.
Yeah.
And modernism was all about that reaction to moving forward.
And it kind of scuppered that.
Yeah. And looking at what the future might hold.
Yeah.
Through an optimistic lens most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people's lives were seeing those improvements to them as you like in the turn of the century. Yeah, that it has that element of hope. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of it's like, you know, we've grabbed hold of hope again. I just kind of feel like it's like like generations of confidence. You know,
Yeah, I can see that.
in like we can't go wrong. Look at what we've been able to achieve as a species. Everything's going great, you know, and like you've got whole generations where that element of positivity's been able to fester, and then you have certain art movements and stuff like that that then respond to that element of intrinsic like holistic positivity.
Yes.
You know, as a like a global, I guess, movement. Yeah.
And then when we talk about postmodernism,
Yeah.
I see it as the teenage years. I don't know if you kind of see this.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's kind of like we had this like, oh, it's hopeful, let's move towards the future, and then we go all Kevin and go, oh, everything's crap. Oh, I can't be bothered to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And it becomes this kind of commentary on irony and this idea of kind of like, look where we are.
Yeah.
This is the reality that it is, and it's a little bit more cynical in nature.
That's what ends up coining like an explanation of postmodernism is the cynicism that's involved. The things. What's the word? It's like essentially it's a product of modernism, but it's a response to modernism where you're basically saying that all of that modernism was a load of hooey. And this is the reality of life. Yeah. Life is nihilistic. There's no meaning to it. There's none of that. No, it's rubbish. Ugh. That sort of thing.
I'm not going to my room, Mum.
Yeah, exactly. Mum is God in this situation. Yeah. Or Albert Einstein or anyone who, you could relate in some way to the modernist movement.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because when we look at like the 90s and early 2000s culture, it was very antagonistic, almost punk, and this idea of kind of rebelling against form. And postmodernism, particularly the postmodernism that I was a part of, was rebelling against conformity.
Yeah.
I'm not outing myself as a punk live on the podcast, but
but I mean, like, you look at the young ones, for example. If we're looking down that road of like punk, you've got all of the rebellion. It's just rebel. Yeah. But then you've got parodying that idea of rebellion as well. All of these like stereotypes that then came out in like later like postmodern stuff end up getting parodied. And everything just gets parodied because you're poking fun at things. Because there's no meaning to anything. So you can just basically just have a bit of banter between friends, but on a global scale. That's rubbish. Oh, no, you're rubbish. Oh, no, I'm rubbish. And then there's people in politics and stuff like that who are basically, either massively corrupt or trying to make a difference and fail. And everyone's going, oh, you failed.
Basically, everyone
rubbish.
became Beavis and Butthead for like for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Beavis and Butthead just sniggering at each other at how everything on TV is shit, basically. Yeah, and that's postmodernism to a certain extent, but that's us bastardizing it. But one thing I kind of wanted to mention is the idea of as we move on and we start talking about metamodernism, it's just this idea that you can look on, say, Wikipedia or something like that, and you have, say, for example, a list of notable modernist films. Okay, so say, for example, Rashomon comes up, which will be one that we've come across in our lives. Singing in the Rain, that sort of thing. It's got that element of optimism. Yeah, the idea of authorship of a film and all of the French New Wave stuff would fall within that modernistic approach. Which is interesting, but then I kind of feel like French New Wave kind of shows like a movement towards postmodernism. But this idea of like author intent and all of this other stuff is still idealistic, and it's too idealistic for some people's definitions of postmodern.
Yeah. And this is where it gets blurry, right? Because it wasn't like one day everyone had a modernistic outlook on art, and then suddenly everyone became postmodern, and it slowly transitioned over time, and there were still modernistic things created in the postmodern era, right?
Yeah,
and there's still postmodern things created now in the kind of metamodern era.
Yeah.
So it's not this kind of like clear cut transition.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why people argue a lot about and. Trust me, there's a lot of arguments.
There's a lot of argument.
A lot of discourse.
I mean, I was just mentioning a list of modernist films because I've highlighted at least I've selected say 5 out of every 12 films that make its way on a list of notable modernist films have in brackets also called a postmodern film. It's one or the other. But it's not clear cut because you
Yeah.
have so much argument, you know. So, for example, you know, a funeral parade of roses from 1969 is also called postmodern as well as modern. But what's the point of us doing this if we can't, like, you know, have any sort of like conclusiveness to this? And this is what kind of annoys me about the whole thing, you know. But you can see something is postmodern, yeah. The work of Quentin Tarantino, yeah, the early work of Quentin Tarantino, at least, is
and
postmodern.
Like Andy Warhol, definitely postmodern as opposed to modernism.
Yeah.
It's that critique on where we are and branding and yeah, Quentin Tarantino it's self-referential, but also it's about this idea of like where we are, and it's cynical and it's nihilistic and
yeah. So I guess, I mean, like, one way to kind of also look at it, because we're saying that things are happening, you know, outside of like these ages that we have. But a nice thing to take into account is modernism was predominantly during the age of radio, whereas postmodernism is during the age of television, whereas we're now into the internet age, and this is where we're looking at the metamodernism, you know, and during a television age, of the 80s and like 90s to a certain extent, and like earlier as well, if you were to say to someone what is meta, people would not know. But in the internet age, almost everyone has kind of an idea what meta is by now, to a certain extent. You know, so like metamodernism certainly lives within that age of the internet and internet culture. And, you know, you've got things like, for example, Facebook, who have actually changed their name to the metaverse, you know, but really they're actually getting that from a 1992 novel called Snow Crash. And it's quite funny because it's a dystopic world where people essentially like live online in a metaverse that exists alongside like actual reality. And then reality is dominated by malevolent mega corporations who have privatized every sector of human life.
It's like they're winking at us.
Yeah, but like, it's ironic that they've chosen that name. And that's when we kind of get into metamodernism, is that idea of like cynical irony of postmodern thought process becomes something else. The irony takes another form as it moves into metamodernism. Yeah? Help me out here. Try and define now metamodernism for me.
So again, this is subjective, right? Because it's all like philosophies. But I would say that metamodernism is that kind of bridge between the kind of hopefulness that we can change, and that we are evolving, and that kind of cynical look of where we are, and that kind of bridging of the two. I find that a lot of metamodernism stuff is sometimes uncomfortable. And forces you to see stuff. But it's hopeful in its messaging that it's to dissuade or to change. So if we're like, for example, if we're looking at the substance, the whole film is uncomfortable. It's not a happy experience, but it is trying to make us realise that there is a better way. We don't have to be so obsessed with fame and look and how we are perceived. That's where we are now, but it's not always where we should be.
Yeah, definitely. If I was to add to that, like a big word that always comes up when you talk about metamodernism or try to get a definition of it is this idea of oscillation. Okay, so the idea of a continuous movement back and forth, an oscillation. Okay, like the pendulum swinging. Okay, and the pendulum is moving from left to right, but on each side of that pendulum is irony and sincerity. So you're moving between the sincere approach of hope of a modernist ideal, and then you're going to the cynical irony of a postmodern response to things. And you're going back and forth, you know, and you're essentially, the image that you end up creating is that movement in between the middle, and you have that oscillation, you have that movement between. you know. Alongside that is the idea that with metamodernism, you're essentially in that internet age, but you're also in an age that has rejected a lot of these postmodern ideals, etc., or lack of ideals, because it just gets you nowhere within society. You know, there's a lot of talk about the idea of it being a response to, say, 9/11, you know, and this idea that you've got like an end to history. You know, a lot of people who are like big proponents of metamodernism are essentially saying, no, history does not need to end here. We are living in the present.
Yeah.
We're not too much looking back, but we are also at the same time looking back, but for different reasons that we have done in the past.
Yeah.
You know? So you get your homages, you get your parodies, you get your pastiche and things like that on like modern like products and stuff like that. But then there is a difference in the way in which you're approaching their use. They're in stories, they're in narratives and stuff like that promote positive discourse for the betterment of society.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, even with, say, for example, like certain comedies. Now, I promised that I would talk about Tim and Eric, you know.
You did. I've been waiting.
And you've already mentioned the idea of things being uncomfortable. Now, they live in that sort of, that area of uncomfort, you know, and the comedy is uncomfortable. Yeah. And they're getting actors on screen, etc., that are just doing an absolute piss poor job of whatever it is that they're doing, and it creates that uncomfortableness. But also, if I was to argue that that's metamodern, it would have to have that element of sincereness in it. Yeah. Okay? And I don't know if it necessarily has. You could argue that it has, you know. So are you a fan of Carl Pilkington, for example?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I love Carl Pilkington. Now, like, you could argue that Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant, they sit there and they bully him, yeah? And they've discussed this,
you
know? But at the same time, everyone ends up loving him, okay? And loving what he ends up, like, saying, and also a lot of the time agreeing with him.
Yeah.
And relating to him and relating to the things that he's saying. But also, you know, the fact that you put someone like Carl, who, you know, is, I guess
almost outlandish in his thinking sometimes.
Yes, yeah. Like they coin it as like he's of low intelligence and stuff like that. But they're always talking about at the same time of how he's a genius, you know.
Yeah. Idiot savant, like.
If this was like postmodern, surely we were just looking at that and there's nothing to appreciate there. Yeah. We're just, that's a funny, stupid guy. But then, like, you could argue that we're looking at this and we're appreciating, like, the intelligence that's actually there, you know, that isn't formally educated. And so you could argue essentially that it then brings up this idea of class and formal education. You know, he didn't go to university, but he sat there with two university like boffiny big head guys going, no, you're I'm an atheist. There's no such thing as ghosts and stuff like that. But then, like, I mean, we kind of in this podcast we play with the idea of but what's if there's something different? What if science hasn't got all of the answers and stuff like that? You know, I mean, it opens up this big.
It's cynical in the nature that, you know, there's two very well-regarded intellectuals, but then there's someone that isn't. But still, this wayward thinking opens the door for this like really fantastical way of seeing the world sometimes, and I think that's what draws people in. Because Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant could both explain things way better than we ever could about almost any issue, right?
Yeah, all right, yeah.
But well, I think so.
Yeah, possibly.
But somebody like Carl would be able to look at it from a completely different angle that we would never even... I'm not saying that it is necessarily right or all the factual stuff would be right, but it's a very interesting, dynamic angle that nobody else could come up with.
Yeah.
And that is the beauty of human thought, right? It doesn't just matter if you're right. Sometimes it's about if it's interesting.
Yeah.
If it's a different way of viewing.
So yeah, I mean, like metamodernism. We're gonna run out of time, but essentially, it's like just think of it as that element of finding the truth in the irony, finding the element of message that is important to partake in, to enact effective, positive discussion, you know? And so, like, say, for example, when you've got all of those references and stuff like that in Everything Everywhere All at Once and stuff like that, you know, or like Ratatouille and other such stuff, you know, it's essentially, it's that intertextuality, but it's also, it's toying with the idea of the fact that we all understand meta at this point in time. So it's just throwing stuff out there. And the substance does that as well. You know, we started saying that we were going to be talking about substance. But we haven't touched it, have we?
No.
Really. But they throw loads of stuff at the wall, you know. They find ironic ways in order to present some information to you, you know. And we talked about how it's like playfully like shit in the way in which it's presenting certain ideas and stuff, you know, but at the same time it's managing to reach high levels of storytelling that really allow you to relate to that mad character, and have the message, whatever the message is. And we explored that last week, didn't we, of what that was, you know, and it does it just so well.
It's incredible.
And it's a pastiche, isn't it? It's a pastiche of all of these different things. We discussed how, you know, like one film, what's that incorporating in that? What are we getting from that, you know? And you've got that with all sorts of other like meta-modern films that are coming out, you know? Everything Everywhere All at Once. Sorry to Bother You by Boots Riley. You know, you mentioned Bo Burnham's Inside. Talk about Bo Burnham's Inside for us.
So it is a comedy special, but the comedy special happened during the pandemic. So he shot the whole thing by himself. Sequenced the music, shot the whole thing by himself. And it's so self-referential about his journey, but it's also like what he's seeing from the outside in his house, what he's seeing about what is going on with the global pandemic at the time and the politics in his own country, and how corporate entities are and were working, and it was this kind of like, oh shit, get me off the bus kind of like 1 hour special. It was funny, it was self-referential, but at times it was dark, cynical, but it was like, we don't have to do this, guys. Like this could be.
It's that message at the end, isn't it? That's what you're wanting for a metamodern.
Highly recommend that you watch it. I think we should do an episode on it. It's an incredible. It's amazing.
I'd love to do that. Something out of the box, something a little bit different than just the films that we're going to be watching. But look, everyone, what we're doing here today is we're just trying to introduce you to that concept so that you can go, oh wow, and start looking at that. You know, I know personally when I look at all this stuff and I want to get into it, it becomes so inaccessible when I get to those higher levels of discourse where you've got like scientific journals and stuff where people just tend to take it perhaps a little bit too far. At least at this early stage, because people are paid to think about this, aren't they? At the end of the day, but like, what's interesting, a way in which this is going is the idea that because it's more accessible to more people, they are getting the wrong end of the stick. I think to a certain extent, like
too many cooks spoil the broth.
Like, one thing that is worrying to me is the idea that people are kind of using this as like a new form of religion, as a full way to live your life, you know, and, you know, like people are essentially like taking like the Jewish like Torah, that tree-like symbol, etc., and then like adding all of these meta modern like philosophies to it, and this is how like the modern world is and stuff like that. And it's just very strange how they've been able to just do that. And I just link back to that idea of birds aren't real, and the fact that it's parodying these sort of things. Like you've got to get some perspective. Do you know what I mean? There's like we don't have like a postmodern like sort of like religion, do we? Like what would that even look like? I don't know. I suppose if you think about it as like
I could draft one up. We could bring it on the pod.
Yeah, but I mean, like I mean, like maybe having another form of religion that is metamodern isn't necessarily a bad thing, you know. But like the flying spaghetti monster, is that metamodern or is that postmodern?
I'd say that's postmodern.
That's postmodern, yeah.
Yeah.
We're laughing at the idea that it is a, what's the word? We're essentially just cynically creating this thing, you know.
Yeah.
But then do people start believing in the flying spaghetti monster? Do you know what I mean? Like, like where do you draw the line? At what point in time does
in 200 years they're gonna be like, they believed in a flying spaghetti monster because that's all that's kind of left.
Yeah, I know, but it's like, do you know what I mean? Like, at some point in time, that will find its way. If it continues, I don't necessarily think it has continued, to be honest with you.
I think it's died a death a bit.
It's died a death, but like, you know, we now have a meta-modern approach, which would potentially, you would see religion in the form of, I don't know, like being able to believe there's not a God, but also believe there is a God. Maybe that's what Satanism is now turning into. That is something that, you know, you've got like a big rise of Satanism in schools, after school clubs and things like that. Well, Satanism isn't actually about worshiping the devil. It's about like freeing yourself from like, you know, all of these like structures and things and finding your way, and it's actually quite beneficial. It's that idea of it being actually quite beneficial that stops it from being postmodern and becomes metamodern. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Shall we wrap it up?
Should we wrap it up? What are we watching tomorrow? Not tomorrow, next week.
Next week is Men. I don't know why I said Men.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to look at, is it Alex Garland?
It is, yeah.
It's Alex Garland's Men. Last week we looked at something that kind of had a theme of misogyny to it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to be able to see a different approach to that idea of men represented in film in relation to, like, you know, their relationship with women, men versus women. And so we've got a film called Men.
Yeah. And I'm looking
Lovely.
forward to it. And I'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, and Scarlett, if you're out there, you've got our number, right?
I guess I won't see you next week if Scarlett gets in touch.
Yeah, that's true.
Woo!